It's time to stitch the outer borders on the Sippin on Sunshine quilt. For the outer borders, they will be stitched exactly like the inner borders, except they will just be wider strips of fabric. Now for the inner borders, I cut my fabric 1.5 inches, which is the trim size. However, the directions call for the borders to be cut a little bit bigger, then quilted, and then after they're quilted, trimmed down to a little bit smaller size to sew on the quilt. I cut mine to that size prior to quilting. And so for the outer border, the directions say to cut these strips 5 inches wide, quilt, and then trim that strip down to 4.5 inches by width of fabric. I am going to go ahead and cut mine to 4.5, then do the quilting, and I'll be ready to go. Now I do this because for me it's easier to place this fabric evenly if it's cut to exactly the correct size, because when I am getting ready to run my quilting, there will be a fabric placement line that is 4.5 inches. And so if my fabric is 4.5 inches, I have 2 lines to line my fabric up. And I have just found that that's easier. I get better results. And so I will cut mine a little bit different than the directions. Now I do need to back my fabric, so I will roll out 2 long strips the same length as this fabric, heat press it, and then I'll come back and get this cut to size. So I have 2 long strips of interfacing, so I just butted those together, and this goes the whole width of fabric. There's the selvages on that end, and then of course down here there's selvages on this end. All right, so now I'm going to go heat press this. I have my whole entire piece backed with interfacing, and now I need to cut this into 4.5 inch strips. So the first thing I'll do is clean up one of the edges and then flip that, and then I will cut 4.5 inch pieces. This is the piece that I have left over. All right, so I'm going to put that in my stash. And I have 4 pieces, 1 for each side of the quilt. All right, so now it's time to get the batting cut. I'm going to cut the batting the same way. I'm going to get my Warm and Natural and cut that to 4.5 inches. I have my batting. I just left it out when I cut those 1 inch strips, and so remember I have 8 layers, and that's a lot. I normally don't cut that, but this is rolled so nicely that it's easier to cut. And again, I'm using my 60mm blade because this is so thick, the depth of this 8 layers, that when you look at a 45, which is a regular standard rotary blade, you can see that this looks like a mini version, and this blade from here to here just isn't thick enough, big enough to go through the depth of those 8 layers. And so that's why I'm using this big one. So now I will line this up to 4.5. And even though it's thick, I am going to put a marking. I'm going to kind of press it down and make sure that I'm not, slanted, that I'm as straight as I can be. So I'll be straight on this fold and then straight, and make sure I'm on the 4.5 all the way up. And then I will cut. And I'm going to press down. I have to press down pretty hard because this is so thick. And I will go slow because this is 8 layers. So now again I have one super long because this is all just folded up. So right now I'm just going to start with 2. I've opened my USB. I'm going to go to the quilting bundle and choose the border drink one. And this has both those little bubbles that I chose not to stitch for my inner borders, as well as the larger border with the bottles. They are both called border drink one. So I need to choose a large border. I need the 4 by 14. Remember, my fabric was cut to 4.5, which means that is a 4-inch border size. I'm going to hit set, and I am still using my 9 by 14-inch hoop, and I am going to hoop 2 strips together. So I am going to go to edit and move this one all the way to the right. I'll select OK. I'm going to make a copy, go to move, and move that copy all the way to the left. And you can see there is not very much room between the two, but that's okay because my fabric will go directly on those stitching lines, and so it's okay that they're this close. I'll choose OK and embroidery. And if I go to the minus plus needle, again, you'll see 2 sets of colors, which means that right now it will stitch out one border start to finish. And I want to color group those. So I'm going to go to layout and choose these little spools. If I go back to the minus plus needle, now you can see there's just one set of colors, and it will do all the same steps for both at the same time. The first step is to run the placement for the batting. The next step is the batting tack down, and again I kept my batting exactly to size, and so I will skip this. I will select the down arrow, and I have to skip both. And now I'm going to run the fabric placement. For the placement lines, I just used the Cappuccino, one of the brown colors, so that I could see the placement lines. Now, the next step is to place the batting and then the fabric. When I cut these originally, I cut the wrong size. I cut 4.5 inches, which is the same as our fabric, and this needs to be a 1/2 inch smaller because I don't want batting in my seam allowances. And so this needs to be cut to the same size as the background quilting file, which I chose the 4-inch by 14-inch. And so I went ahead and just took off the 1/2 inch from both my strips. So now I have a 4-inch wide piece. I still have this all together in one super long strip. And this is the same as the inner border. It's done exactly the same way, other than it's just a larger file and larger fabrics. So I'm going to spray my batting. I'll place it down the center using those placement lines. I'll spray my fabric and use the placement lines for the fabric, tape down, and we'll go to the machine. So I'm ready to stitch the tack down, and again I start at the top of my hoop. I will always start a new section of quilting at the top, and I have both strips, and then I did not loop the batting this time. I have one piece on one side and one piece on the other, but I have the whole long strip just hanging down. And I'll just make sure that those don't get caught up. I'll kind of loosen and put them on my wool mat so that it doesn't, you know, give any tension while this is stitching. So the first step, again, is to tack down just the edges of the fabric. Now the last step is to go ahead and stitch those super cute soda bottles. Now the directions call to use the lighter green, and when I look at the picture, I can't really see any quilting, and you know, maybe that's a good thing. I guess it depends on how much you want the quilting to stand out. I am not going to use the light green, so I thought, well, maybe I'll use the dark green that will stand out, and I was going to use this, and then I decided to go ahead and use my metallic green. So I have my metallic green. It will stand out, it will be sparkly, and I think it'll be a fun addition to these borders. So as usual, I have just an inexpensive brand of metallic, and so this is how I thread it. I put it in front of my machine, and I again find that it doesn't stitch any better if I use a thread stand. I'm kind of using a thread stand on my machine, or my machine like a thread stand. And so I have it sitting in front. I have it, you know, going up. And then I have a little pair of scissors that I just put the thread under. It doesn't interfere, it doesn't cause any tension, it just keeps it as it goes behind where my bobbin winder is. It helps that not, you know, flip over. I need it, and this is kind of, you know, what a thread stand would do. And then it's just threaded. Now I will go ahead, go to my settings. I'm going to lower the speed all the way to 350. I just find that for my metallic thread that's inexpensive, that's what it stitches good at. In fact, even when I use more expensive metallic thread, I usually try to remember to lower the speed. I'm going to keep it on the screen so that I don't forget to change it back when I'm ready to do the second hooping. All right, so I'm ready to go, and we'll stitch out the cute bottles. So I needed to change my bobbin, so I will hit return and finish stitching. But what I'm going to do, because it's now in the middle of a design and not like a placement or a tack down, I am going to go back, I think 6. And that's because I had to cut my thread and it wasn't tacked off because it's right in the middle of the design, and so this will just go over what was cut. All right, so I'm going to continue. I love this. I love that I can see the bottles, and I love that they're sparkly. I have always been a super fan of Kimberbell borders. All right, so I'm stitching out the next set of placement lines for the batting and fabric. And so for these, all I'm going to do is just cut. I'm not cutting right by the fabric. I'm just trimming so that I can get the bulk of this stabilizer off, and I don't want to trim right next to it. I think that will just increase the risk of having the edges fray, even though I have interfacing, and so I just leave them like this. But I will trim the excess just to make it a little bit more manageable. Now there's only one out of the 4 sides that I will cut nice and neat, and that is at the end of the first background quilting. So here's the unquilted. And I do have to say, there are 6 lines that need to match up when we start the next one. So I am going to get as close as I can. That may be tough to get those exactly even. All right, so at the end of the strip, I am just going to cut right along that, folding both the fabric and the batting back, and of course being careful not to, let me get my fabric scissors, being careful not to cut your fabric or your batting. And this is just a nice even edge to help us place on the next placement line. All right, so let me finish this one. I have both the batting and fabric placement lines, and again, this to my left is the top of my hoop, and it's important to put what I've quilted towards the top. Now you can start from the bottom if you want, but always start from the bottom. So if I were to have started this way the first time and quilted it like this, I would need to start it at this end again. Always put it the same, otherwise your bottles would be upside down. All right, so again, we have 6 lines, and that's kind of making me nervous, so I'm going to do the best that I can, and we'll just see how it goes. So what I'm going to do is fold back the batting and the fabric to right where I made that nice cut, and I'm going to line that up right with this. Now I'm going to spray again. I try to spray lightly so that I don't get it on my hoop, but you know, every once in a while I'll have to clean it, but it's only when I spray in the hoop when I do borders. All right, so I've got my quilted piece towards the top or the left of my hoop, and I'm going to fold this and put that fold right next to that placement line. The batting, of course, should line up with those inner stitching lines. And remember, I still have this super long strip. Now, if that is too much to deal with, you can either do these separate. You can cut these and not have a long strip. You can do sections at a time if you want. And then I'll lightly spray and then line up my fabric. And I think when I lined it up last time, I was just to the underside of this. So I'm going to try to do that the same to hopefully get these to line up. I mean, it's pretty much right on, but I remember seeing that, so we're going to try. All right, so now I'll do the second one exactly the same. All right, I've got them both ready to go, so let's go tack down the fabric. The first thing I want to do before I even tack this down is to see if I am right at that tack down. That would be the best scenario. So I could use my laser, but because there is a lot of depth under here with the batting and it's going up over the back, and even if you press it down, I just feel like putting the needle down gives a much more accurate place to where this is going to start. So I'm going to just use my needle down, and I think that is pretty close. Let me lift it up. It was a hair over, you see now it is a little bit back. I'm okay with that. I'm going to try to kind of, even though it's taped, I'm going to try to scooch it over and try that again to see if just, you know, kind of pushing the fabric would help to get that right. I'm not worried about it being at the very end. If it's overlapping this stitch a little bit, I'm okay with that. And that looks better. It looks like it's right, is about as close as I can get. I don't think I could do a better job at that. All right, so I'm going to run the tack down, and I think what I'm going to do is the same thing on this side. The tack down will run this way, and then it will run up the other side, so I can't, I could check by moving ahead to the very end, but I think I'm just going to take a chance, but I will stop my machine to make sure that when it starts on this side that I am as close as I can be. Going to start on this bottom line, so let's hope that it's in line with that. I'm going to put my needle down, and I can see that it's right in line. Can you see it's about a stitch and a half back? I'm okay with that because that's fine. So I'm hoping that because I'm tacked down, that looks good. I'm hoping that the other lines line up as good as they can. I don't think you really, I think you just have to go for it and kind of line up one, and just it is what it is. All right, so I don't have my thread yet, so I'm going to raise and put my metallic thread. I am going to lower my speed, and I'm going to stitch this. At the end, you saw me holding my start stop button. I stopped my machine and then I held it down. If you hold it down, it starts, and it will, you can literally count the stitches. And if you let go, then it will go back to full speed. And so what I did is when I was coming up, I got about right here, I stopped my machine, and then I started it and held that button down, and I was just making sure that it looked like it was lining up. I thought maybe if it wasn't lining up, I could maybe, you know, manipulate the fabric. It did a pretty good job. It did overlap, you know, back probably 2 stitches and then, you know, come back. So there's probably, you know, several back and forths over the end of that last stitching. But if you look, that looks pretty darn good. Now I'm hoping that this will be the same. I've got 4 out of the 6, so we'll see. So what I'm going to do again is I am going to hold, when I start, if I hold this down, it will just go stitch by stitch. Now again, when you let up, it does not stop, it goes full speed. So if you're wanting to stop, then you have to let go and hit it again. I hope that makes sense. All right, so let's try this. I'm going to hold this down and just kind of watch. At this point, I have this tacked down and I have these three. There's probably not a whole lot I can do, but it makes me feel better that I can see if I'm close. All right, so I'm going to hold that down, and you can see it just goes stitch by stitch. And it looks like it's about right. Now it's over, again, it's overlapping, so it'll be a little bit thicker, but you know, who's gonna know? No one's gonna know. All right, we have one more. Oh, okay, now we have this, so I let go. I'm gonna stitch that little label, and then when it's done with that, I'm going to stop, because I have to stop, and now I'm going to start it again and hold and not let go. Okay, don't fail me now. So now it's what it is, and I can finish out. Now I am going to stop so that I can test that. But look at that. I mean, if I were to back up and there wasn't this piece of tape, I would be hard pressed to see where that started and stopped. I'm really happy. Now I have a lot more of these to do, so I'm hoping for the best. So again, let's do this one more time. I'm going to raise my presser foot, and I'm pretty close with the tape right there. I'm going to lower, and it might be a hair off. I'm going to raise that, and I'm going to use my back one, because I just took one stitch. When you put your needle down, it takes a little stitch. So if I do the minus, it's going to go back to the start. And if I pull it a little bit, not pull it, but you know, kind of smooth it. Let's try that. I think that's about as close as I'm going to get. I can see that it's a little bit lower, but again, I think once this is all together, as long as they're not like completely shifted, then I think that's good. All right, so you can see. All right, I'm going to go ahead and stitch this out and come back when it's completely done, and we'll take a look. These next two hoopings are done, and you can see where my tape is. So my join is right here, and I think they look great. I hope that I can replicate that on the next pieces. I'm actually kind of shocked that they lined up so good. I love the little bottles. All right, so I am going to go ahead and do one more hooping. I have this piece of fabric left on the end, and let me see if I fold this over. I have enough for an entire hooping, and I'll have, you know, an inch or so left, and that will be plenty. So I'm going to do exactly the same steps. I will run all of the placement. I will take these out and just trim loosely, and then fold this back to place on the placement, and again, do my best to line up. I am very pleased with that. All right, so let me get to that point where these two strips are done, and then actually what I'm going to do is I have to do another two strips. So I have two sets of strips, and they each have 3 hoopings, so it's quite a bit. This was about a 30-minute stitch out, when most of it again was on my lowest speed because of the metallic thread. And so if I was using regular thread, it wouldn't be that long. And so that is 30 minutes per hooping, and so it's an hour to get 2/3 of the way done. So these are labor intensive, but again, most of that is because I am turning my machine down to the very lowest for my metallic. All right, so I'm going to work on all these and get these done, and we'll be set to start finishing our quilt.